Hi, everyone. I am so thrilled to share with you this time that I am sharing with Christina Baldwin. As all of you know, I've been like a huge supporter and fan of journaling, and we've had quite a few videos and discussions about that in the past. But today, oh my God, today our special guest is someone that I would call the mistress journaler, Christina Baldwin. What an honor. Christina, I don't know if you know this, but one of your very early books on journaling profoundly influenced me as a
Hmm.
teenager
Oh,
to journal and to stick with it.
yeah.
And now we're friends. So funny when you meet somebody first in their book
Hmm.
and then you actually
Have
decade
tea.
and then you have tea, right? You have tea, and then you say, "Oh my gosh, where have you been?"
Hmm.
So that is also part of this story in this moment that I get to share with our listeners. So Christina, share a little bit about your journaling process and where it began for you.
It began for me in eighth grade when I read the Diary of Anne Frank.
Mm,
And at that time, I don't know if this is still true, but at that time, across the US, the Diary of Anne Frank was read by every eighth grader.
mhm.
And I took it to such heart and had so much identification with her. My actual first journal entry is writing to Kitty, which is the persona that Anne wrote to during the war. And I wrote to her and said, as you have probably guessed by now, Anne is dead. And burst into sobs over my blank book, you know?
Oh, now I'm crying.
Yes. So I think that I was so enamored of Anne Frank because it was the first time in the 1960s that I really saw that a girl had such a voice. And I saw that the voice of a girl had influenced the whole world, been translated and preserved. And I've studied several of the scholarly works about her over the years. And one of my favorites is the closing line where it says, "And so this voice that should have been silenced along with millions of others, a voice no louder than a girl's whisper, has survived and speaks to the world." So it's just that. How can you, you know? So
Yeah.
once I
And I
got
can
it,
I can hear how that has influenced you.
absolutely. And when I wrote my book, Storycatcher, my editor was a young man of several generations younger, like probably in his late 30s when I was working with him. And he wrote me on this chapter, "Anne Frank, question mark, really?" And I said, "Trust me, that this is a huge imprint on the midlife women who would be reading my books." And so
Wow.
that imprint there, I mean, but I wasn't thinking about being a professional writer then. I was just trying to break the silence that surrounded so much of our experience at that time. Because this is 1960, it's before the big breakout of the 60s. And everything just kind of imploded down into this silence underneath Ozzie and Harriet and Father Knows Best and all that kind of sugary satin, white suburban privilege. Leave it to Beaver and don't say anything.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
And when you say that, I'm really struck by the thought that that is still what journals do.
absolutely. And
Still break the silence.
mhm,
I was
mhm.
reading today in the New York Times that Alexei Navalny has
Mm,
more coming out that he wrote
mm.
when he was in Germany. And he has a message for all of us about
Yeah.
standing up
Mhm.
to oppression. And and again, it's the same thing. I mean, this is still what journals do is give voice. So I just really appreciate you saying that, Christina. You've also taught journaling.
Yes.
You've taught, and you've taught it
I,
around the world. You still
yes.
teach it.
Yeah.
And what does that mean to teach journal writing?
I think it means to encourage people to break into their own voice, basically. And when I began teaching journal writing, when I came back from living in Europe in my sort of 23, 24, and I came back to Minnesota and faced with, okay, how do I launch into kind of a career, some way to make money? I don't know what I'm doing, kind of thing. And I went to the extension service at the University of Minnesota and I confessed to them in a whisper that I had been keeping a journal for 10 years and I needed a teacher. And I didn't see any courses. And they said, "You've been doing it for 10 years. We're putting you down as the teacher." So, I mean, it was so new. And so I got in this little classroom and I had 12 people show up, 10 poets and an antiquarian book dealer and a couple of school teachers. And they're all sitting in rows with their little spiral notebooks from Walgreens, and I'm standing at this lectern with no idea how actually to do this. And I said, this isn't going to work. Let's sit down. And so we moved all the desks into a circle. And you call me the master or the mistress, but I think of myself as a steward and a student constantly, because from that very first circle on, I thought we have to discover this together. It's not, here are 12 things to make you an excellent journal writer. If you follow these, your life will be great. It's like, what do you have to say? What are you not saying? Where's the edge of what you say to others and what you say to yourself about who you are? And how might that edge grow and expand?
Well,
And
there you are saying the whole thing for you has been about voice, about
yeah.
discovering and uncovering and revealing one's true voices
Mm-hmm.
and that inner voice. And there you are saying it again, saying it's not really a teaching as much as it is an opening into and holding a space for and and letting people dive in and find their voice.
Right. So I've noticed some patterns over these decades,
Really?
and just a few. And what I always say at the beginning of any class is date the top of the page. Whether you're typing or writing, date the top of the page and break every other rule. Because there's something about dating the page that's kind of like a tiny little thumbtack in your brain. And it will help you begin to see narrative link and go, I've written about this before, or I think I've had this thought before, and it's just helpful. So that's the first thing I say. The second thing is ask yourself what boundaries you need around this and protect them.
Mhm.
So if you're typing, and when I started off, nobody was typing because we didn't have laptops, we didn't have computers. A few people typed on typewriters, but it's really been a practice of the long hand. And I love it because the nerve endings along the side of your hand going across pages as you write activate a different part of the brain than this. So I prefer and always write my journals longhand. But some people, for various reasons, are very acclimated to typing, or for accessibility reasons, they need to do that. But I just say that find your boundary and protect that boundary. Do you need to keep it in a locked drawer? Do you need to keep it in a locked box? One woman I remember had a banker's box and she drove around with it in her car because then she knew the kids weren't ever going to go through it, kind of thing. And
Right, right. That's what I talk about also with people is like
I know you're the
people are
boundary
worried
queen.
about the boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
How do they put something so vulnerable out and what if somebody reads it? And, you know, I I think that sometimes there are people that we do share with,
Mm-hmm.
You know, I remember like when my kids were young, sometimes one of them would like to read her journal writing to me, and the other one did not like to do that. And sometimes we would just read little snips to each other as just a sharing, but we understood the boundaries of that's a private space. And sometimes people are worried about that. So I love that idea that you're sharing of find a locked space that only you have the key to, where you feel very, very safe. And the online environment sometimes is not the safest place.
No kidding.
For things like a journal. And I just really want to say that to people. Like I understand the typing and maybe you want to type and print and get it offline, but it's not the safest place for such precious internal thinking and feeling.
Absolutely. And I see people, younger people, like I have nieces and nephews who put out on Facebook and so forth. I mean, stories that are gut-wrenching to me. And I go, really? You want 67 comments on almost being date raped or something, and we're shifting our understanding of boundaries and privacy. But the reason for protecting, understanding, and asking yourself, what do I need to protect about my writing, is so that you can go deep, so that you can take the journal and use it as a safe place, knowing that you've done your best.
And it's a conversation with yourself. I always say to people, I do journaling to digest my life, just like I eat food. I am digesting my life and I'm trying to understand myself better. And maybe I'm trying to understand an experience that I'm having or feelings that I'm having, but I am digesting. And then once I have kind of journaled through something, then it's been integrated into me. Like I've learned something from it as well.
Yeah.
So, what are some tips you have for people? You've already given us some tips, but are there more tips that you have for people to get the most from their journal practice? Like, what do you think those are? And then we're going to look at some of your journals because we got to share this.
So, one thing I do is people say I don't have time. So, I invite them to set a timer for 5 minutes or 7 minutes and just do just like a one slow inhale, exhale of breath with your eyes closed. Open your eyes and let your gaze fall on anything in your environment. It could be the cell phone lying on the desk. It could be a candle or a pen or whatever. And that's the word you put at the top of the page. Ooh, I see my cell phone on the desk. And then you go somewhere, and the screen is black and blank. Why don't I go to my journal instead of this little blank screen? Or my grandmother could never have imagined that this little square could be bigger than a library. I mean, it's just let your mind go wherever it wants to go. And at the end of 5 minutes, that little timer will go off and you make yourself stop. It's like, but I wasn't done. And you walk away and you come back the next day or 3 hours later and you do it again for 5 minutes and you do it again for 5 minutes. And what that entrains in us is to get to the insight fast. Because the mind is trying to give us insight. It's trying to do that digestion factor you just referenced. It wants to inform us and go, see how smart I am? Look what I'm thinking about. Here's a feeling. You want a feeling? It's constantly trying to do that, and we're too busy. We're not.
I'm holding on now. Buckle up, everyone.
We're distracted. We're scrolling. We're doing something, but the mind is going, hello, hello, hello.
So when we take those few minutes and jump into our journal, that's our exit from the stuff and our internal being with our grounding with ourselves.
And people think they can't do that. It's like saying, okay, you need to be more focused. We're going to go a 5-day meditation retreat. And people go, oh, I can't do that. But you can do it 5 minutes at a time. And holding the pen in your hand and just being in that somatic relationship of the paper, the smell of the ink, the pen, what's happening to the side of your hand, and the fact that you're smelling, you're reading, you're hearing what's in the background, you're writing. It's like this whole body experience begins to integrate insight. And after a while, it's okay then to not make yourself stop and to just go, I can do 10 minutes, I can do 20, and you begin to gift yourself these little pockets of time that you didn't know you had. So that's one, I think of that as how I constantly refresh my journal writing, is that.
Can we take a peek at some of your unbelievable journals? Because I got to see these in person at Christina's house, which is such an honor,
That's why I piled a bunch here. You
that you
asked me
took out your journals
Yeah.
and you let me take a peek, and I was like, oh,
Yeah.
look at these. So just
So
go
these
ahead and share what you want to share.
these are a A4 style size paper. So these are European sized journals. And I always put a collage on the cover. And then I get so excited that I can't stop. So the collage goes on the inside and it just keeps going and going. And then here's my little date at the top of the page. And then on this side of the page, you'll see that these numbers are here. And this is the days of the month. And so this is actually July 2019. And I have 2 lines that I just kind of keep track of what's happening on a day-by-day basis, because I don't write every day. I write probably a couple times a week. And then I let myself do interior collaging. And I would say that one of the progressions I've seen in journal writing is that at the beginning, we just have to discharge. It is a digestion factor, and it goes all the way through and out the other end. And we just need to get all the dross of our life down on the page.
Yeah.
And so people go, but I'm just whining. And I go, well, when did you start? If they tell me they've been whining for 40 years, then I might encourage them to move on or take action. But if they're just like into journal writing a year or two, I'd say that's natural. It's natural to do the kind of experimentation on getting your wound from inside yourself onto the page and letting it go. And then experimenting with, well, okay, so I did that. What are the changes I need to make in my life, having exposed to myself where my pain is, right? And one of the most effective ways I found when I was doing that writing is that I would write horizontally, and I'd be like in the discharge and writing whatever was irping up about where I was stuck or my childhood or whatever. And then I would turn the journal the other way and write this way. And then it's just a total mush. Nobody can read it. Nobody can decipher it. But you've done the necessary part of shifting it from being kind of a brain worm that's going around and around to, I got it out of me. So then what happens is you get to play. You get to write about joy and gratitude and dreams and all that kind of thing. Here's another journal cover that I really love. And I mean, I love all of them. The hardest part for me is when I get to the end of 6 months and have to change. And yeah.
So beautiful.
Yeah, Stonehenge and the fox and the old trees of where we live.
You also preserve some thoughts in your journals. Like sometimes you put in quotes or song lines or
I
poems.
do. I do a lot of that actually.
I think of it as preservation.
It is kind of. So here's a little gig I was doing. I can't tell exactly where it is, but I just took some of that. I put in some of my blog writings that I really want to note
Mhm.
in a more personal way. I just cut and paste them in. I I don't know if I can find it easily. Oh, this is good. Here we go. So this is the Kavanaugh hearings
Uh-huh.
and Christine Blasey. And I wrote here under these pictures of her. So this is what Joan of Arc looks like in the 21st century at 51, Dr. Christine Blasey Ford appearing before the Inquisition.
I love this because this is also, you're giving people a chance to think about how we digest and process the news and current
Right,
events,
right.
and that, you can also
Mm-hmm.
do this within the space of your journal. Again, it's not a have to. What I love about your process, Christina, is you don't tell people like you have to do this, but this amount of time, and this should be in,
No,
this is just what turns you on in your journal. And and I know that sometimes people find a poem that they love. I know I do this too, and it becomes a jumping in point, a
absolutely.
reflection of what you want to
Mm-hmm.
think about. And so I know that you do that with yours. You also have a new novel, The Beekeeper's Question,
Right.
brand new. And sometimes books can kind of emerge from our practice.
Mm-hmm.
How did something about your own personal story support your ability to do
Hmm.
novel writing, or journaling support you to do novel writing? Like, was there a connection there, or is that totally a separate thing?
I think the connection for me is one of the other practices that really helps me dive into the journal deeper is to write in the third person.
What?
Yes. So I just discovered this by accident once when I felt so stuck in a relationship.
Uh-huh.
And I thought, I am whining about this in my journal over and over and over again. And I thought, how do I break open some insight? And so I just started writing with, once there was a woman who felt bound on every side. And then it became this kind of fairy tale of where this woman felt like she couldn't move and how she began to move, And so I just wrote about her sticking her fingers through the ropes and putting out a peace sign. And I mean, it all came into the metaphor, and it allowed me to begin shifting that relationship. So that's a connection between journal writing and what other kinds of writing may emerge for us is I thought, oh, I get so tired of the I voice. This voice cracks it. And over the years, that was, I think, in my late 30s when I started doing that. Over the years, over and over again, if I really want to get out and make change, I go to the third person or I go to dialogue. And if I don't go to those places, I go, well, I guess you really like going around and around and around in this little mental carousel because you're not doing the things you know would get you off.
Yeah,
So,
when I do that, a dialogue format for our
mm-hmm,
listeners, what I'm doing is I'm letting a part of me totally have voice on the page. So maybe
mm-hmm,
it's the part that, let's use Christina's example, the part that felt trapped and stuck. And so that part gets to write everything she needs to say. And I'm asking her questions.
right,
And another part of me is in dialogue with her. Maybe the
right.
part that would like to stop listening to this. Maybe
Yes,
the part that would wonder, where is this taking us?
right.
But there's another part there. So those are the
Mm-hmm,
parts that start dialoguing. And when I get super stuck in my journal, honestly, like I feel like I can't find a way through to that exit that we talked about, digesting to the exit,
mm-hmm,
and I can't get there. That to me is an indication of I need to go to therapy.
mm-hmm.
That it's like, okay, what am I not seeing, or what skills or tools am I missing, or how else, sometimes I need another person to
Absolutely.
reflect with.
Mm-hmm.
But the journal also becomes a source of that. So what was different for you about novel writing in the Beekeeper's Question? Like where do you see the process being different than what you do in your journal?
Well, one of the kind of, I think, inherent laws of journal writing for me is that it's pretty close to the bone of reality and truth. That
Mhm.
I don't make up histories for me. I'm
Well, we could just take all those diagnostic things right off for you because
right,
you're
yes,
not
just
any of those.
right. And it's my reality. It's not like if I go way back into childhood, I spent 10 years as a child, and then I spent my 30s being a child over again in the journal, and I would write with the non-dominant hand and a crayon to be the child, and then the fountain pen to be the adult. And I basically re-raised myself on
Mm.
the page and designed an adult human being that really fit the needs of that long ago child.
Mm.
And to me, that's one profound aspect of therapy, is that we do that. And yes, it is hugely important and sometimes only safe to do that with somebody who's a trained listener and intervener. And a lot of it for me got done on the page of the journal.
Mm.
So, and then I would bring those insights into a therapeutic relationship, but it gave me a way to do homework, and that was really empowering.
Mm.
So in the novel, I didn't have to stay attached to reality in the same way. And so I could take some of the aspects of my family lineage, both the pathology of it and the gift of it, and just put it in a blender and play with it.
Well, I got to read, your novel. And one of
Mm-hmm.
the things I can also say is there are aspects in your novel that are reflected in your journal. You have
Mm,
current events, you have real
mm-hmm.
world events. I think your
Mm-hmm.
novel is like placed during World War II.
Mm-hmm.
So you have some news type of events that are happening that are woven into your story.
Mm-hmm.
There are some pieces. There's letter writing in your
Yeah.
novel.
Yeah.
Just like you were talking about with dialogue and having a third voice. I mean, there's all of these pieces actually are also expanded into the novel form. They
Mm-hmm.
read differently than a journal, of course, because it's a wonderful novel. It's a page turner. But I do see, for many people who keep a journal, sometimes they're wanting to write in other forms. And so
Mm-hmm.
that's why I'm diving into all this with you, because I see a connection between all the practice and how it does show up in the form in a more polished, different sort of way.
Absolutely. And I go through and mark up my books, as so that I oftentimes go back with colored pencil, and I scroll around paragraphs, and I make a notation at the top for the novel or for the blog or good essay idea, or
I
so
know it's like all in your journal.
yeah, it's a mess, but it's all in one place, and that's part of it. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
that's what I was struck by by
yeah.
by looking at your journals, is how it is all in one place. Because I
Hmm.
have, not only kept journals, but I've also been a student of just sort of
Hmm.
different forms of journal writing. And some have you separate everything into categories. Your dreams go over here, your daily stuff goes
Yeah,
over here, you're reminiscing about your wants and dreams go over there. I tried that method.
didn't
Then
work.
and that's exhausting. Then there is the don't stop moving your hand until you
Uh-huh.
finish 3 full pages. And then there's like the guided rules. And I have found, and I just want to share with those of us that are on here, I have found that, I too need to really just do a form that works for me. And what I'm hoping is our listeners are getting permission that there isn't like one way to do this, but do this like your way. Put in your journal what you want to hold, the way you want to hold it. There are
Mhm.
no real rules, um, but there's an opportunity to check in a world that is so pulling you to check out.
Absolutely. That's a brilliant line. I love that. Because we are responsible for knowing what our story is, for framing it in ways that empower rather than victimize us. Not
Mm.
changing our histories, but over time being able to see that those histories have contributed, even in horrific ways, have contributed to who we are now in the strength of our being. And I call that standing in your story. And when you are standing in your story, you are really braced for whatever the world throws at us.
Ah,
And
and grounded. I mean,
yeah,
that's what, I also really hear in your voice a lot and in your other books that I have read is this sense of grounding. By being
hmm,
in your story, you're grounding.
yeah. And nobody else can really do that for you.
Really?
Yeah, I know.
You
We've
can't
all
work that?
tried, but yeah. No, we have to stay grounded. And I think staying centered and grounded is probably the biggest spiritual challenge that we're facing right now.
Mm.
Because the screen environment, the device environment is all a zero gravity environment in which things are just floating, floating, floating by and saying, grab me, grab me, grab me. But when you reach for them and grab them, they're not connected to anything. It would be like there is no wall to the spaceship. You're just floating, floating in your debris.
Well,
And
that's the
that,
best definition of everything that we're experiencing that I've ever heard.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
That's what it is. It's
mm-hmm,
all without ground.
yes. And so my life work has been helping people put one foot on the ground.
Mhm.
And it's just like put one foot on the ground, then take a step. Put your foot on the ground, take a step. But this is how we get through life. And I think about moving from 1960 and this environment of encapsulated silence to moving to now, in which we're just try to find some silence. How much do you have to turn off in your environment to stop the beeping, the buzzing, the intrusion, the earbuds, and just, and I leave my phone in the corner and all of a sudden Siri says, I didn't get that. And I go, I wasn't talking to you. Why are you on? It's just like,
Right? Yeah.
yeah.
So, so
Mm.
different, so different. Is there anything else that you want to share that um, I haven't touched upon?
Well, we were laughing before we turned on the recording about trying to do a weekend workshop in 20 or 30 minutes. So uh, just relax and do the writing. And when you don't know what else to do, write happy. Find a way to write happy. At the
Mm.
end of many, many days, and I'm not as consistent now as I used to be, but especially in hard times, I got a little notebook I kept in the bedside stand. And at the end of every day, I'd write a blessing a day and just something that tiny little thing that just delighted me in the
Mhm.
course of the day. And
Mhm.
then I would always close those entries with the word thank you. Because thank you means I am in relationship with those events of my day. It's a call and response. And that allows us to attach, even if we're not religious or not, we think we're not spiritual, that allows us to attach to this idea of I am not just floating in zero gravity. This is my story. And no matter how hard the day, here is a little something, and thank you.
Well, I just want to say thank you.
And
You've been
thank
my
you.
you've been my big something today. So
Mm,
thanks for joining. And everybody can see under your name where your website is and how to follow your blog and sign up for it there.
Mhm.
Any classes that you're offering and retreats and books that you've already written that people might want to dive into while we're waiting for the beekeeper's question to come
Yeah,
out. And
yeah.
there's just so much richness there. I encourage all of you to dive in. Take good
Thank,
care.
thank you.